What could make a woman hate her husband? We have all seen cases of dysfunctional families, but the case of the murder and disappearance of Donald Banfield is one that reveals the hatred a woman had for her husband and a daughter for her father, which would result in a lot of threats and violence, ultimately ending up in the disappearance of the man. Welcome to this channel. Today we are going to take a look at the case of the disappearance and murder of Donald Banfield. Before we continue, if you enjoy true crime stories, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to get the latest news on topics like this. Today, we look at the case of the disappearance and murder of Don Banfield, whom after a series of threats from his wife and daughter disappeared, and although his body was not found, was considered to have been murdered. All fingers pointed to his wife and daughter, who fraudulently stole his pension money and proceeds from their family house which they had sold. Don Banfield was born in Trinidad, and he was married to Shirley Banfield, with whom he had a daughter and a son. They were said to have had a troubled marriage, which may have been because he was believed to be a heavy gambler and womanizer. Don and his wife agreed to sell their house, which was estimated to be worth about £179,000. Don retired from his job at William Hill in January 2001, and he stood to inherit a large pension. Before the year 2009, Don's case was treated as a missing persons case until investigations were reopened later that year, when his employer had become suspicious, and the suspicion fell on Don's wife, Shirley Banfield, and his daughter, Lynette Banfield. Just before his disappearance, Don had complained to a couple of people about being physically and mentally tortured by his wife and daughter. He said that he had a feeling that his wife was trying to poison his food, and told his doctor on the day he vanished that he was previously handcuffed to his bed all night. On the day before he disappeared, Don told his doctor about an incident that had occurred 2 weeks earlier. He told his doctor that his wife had tried to tie his legs down and put a plastic bag over his head, but he woke up kicking and screaming before the net. His daughter finally let him go. Before he disappeared, Don already planned to leave his marriage with Shirley, who was a former tax inspector, and take his pension along with him. It was also discovered that the last time Don was seen alive was on the day he signed a contract agreeing to sell their family house, with the proceeds to be received by himself and his wife. On the morning of Don's disappearance, he was said to have reported to the police that he felt he had been struck on the back of his head and had awoken up to his daughter, squirting furniture polish into his eyes, before his wife finally approached him with a knife saying, "Why won't you die?" There were also marks on his body, which he showed to his friends as proof that he was indeed hit and handcuffed. Don also had some suspicions that his posts were being interfered with, and he was only able to start receiving mail after one of his friends allowed him to make use of his address. His posts, however, had indeed been intercepted, as he found a stash of letters addressed to him hidden behind the sofa, one of which was a check from William Hill. He had not experienced anything of such before his retirement. It was barely 4 days after Don's disappearance that Shirley asked Lynette to forge a letter to Don's pension administrator, pretending to be him, requesting that his pension go into his joint account with Shirley. After the 11th of May, his wife and daughter forged documents with his signature, which they used to fraudulently collect his pension. After they had done this, they suddenly moved over 200 miles to Yorkshire and later to Kent. It had already been 8 days after Don had disappeared before he was reported missing, and suspiciously not by his wife or daughter, but rather by one of his friends. The police began to investigate for the motive behind Don's disappearance. It was without doubt that there was a possibility that he could have decided to steal his pension money and his proceeds from the sale of the house, with the knowledge that he would not be coming back, in an attempt to expose his daughter and his wife. It was noted and taken into consideration that Shirley and Lynette had knowledge that Don would be eligible for his pension in January 2003 and fraudulently collected it on his behalf from the 22nd of February that year. In June 2005, Shirley made a claim for disability allowance, which was supposedly written by Don, but was forged by Shirley and her daughter. It was staff from the Department of Work and Pension that helped collect evidence to demonstrate Shirley and Lynette's fraud. Shirley and Lynette were said to have made £120,000 from the sale of the house, as agreed by Don on the last day he was known to be alive at £64,000, which they had stolen from Don's pension fund over the years, and they spent the money on luxury holidays and properties. When they were questioned by the police, Shirley and Lynette claimed to have seen Don the previous Christmas, but it was later proven to be false. They later admitted in court to have lied about seeing Don, which they had done in an attempt to cover up their fraud and continue to claim his pension. All inquiries by the police, which was carried out all over the world for evidence to prove that Don was still alive, failed. It was later discovered that Shirley gave the police a false description of Don, claiming that his hair was grey, and also said that he had shaved his mustache and he wore glasses. This resulted in the release of a completely inaccurate and misleading image of him, which was put on the missing persons poster that was used to appeal for information on his disappearance. This was later revealed when his son Kevin reported that the image looked nothing like his father. Kevin also reported the police about the conversation he had with his father, where Don told him that he was scared for life and wanted to come stay with him. Shirley and Lynette were brought to trial in 2012 for the murder of Don Banfield at the Old Bailey, and also for fraud, forgery, and a conspiracy to pervert justice, of which they pled guilty. It was alleged that his wife and daughter killed Don. Shirley and her daughter were alleged to have killed Don in an attempt to obtain his portion of the proceeds from the sale of their house, and also to claim to his pension money. Though Shirley had indeed been paid in full for the house in June 2001, she falsely told the police that she had seen her husband about it. It was pointed out that the women could have committed the crime because although Don would have had his pension to live on, Shirley faced the possibility of having financial difficulties as she was 54 years of age and on the verge of being left by Don without money to rehouse herself and her daughter. A neighbor alleged of her Shirley shouting, "One of these days I'll kill you." But Shirley claimed to have been talking to her parrot. It was admitted by the defense that Don's wife and daughter were guilty of lying and deception, but it was not evident that they were guilty of murder. Though Shirley claimed that Don had faked his own death, there was no evidence of Don being alive since the 11th of May 2001. Shirley and her daughter were found guilty of murder, and Shirley was sentenced to 18 years imprisonment, while Lynette was sentenced to 16 years. The story of Don's disappearance and possible murder was reported widely by the British press and media. The women were said to have shown no signs of remorse or emotions upon the announcement of the guilty verdict. After their conviction, Don's sister Kay begged the women to reveal to her what they had done to the body of her brother, so that she could give him a proper burial. Sadly, Don's mother died in 2004 without having any idea of what had happened to her son. The lead detective on the case commented that Shirley and her daughter had convinced themselves that they'd never be found guilty for Don's murder, but their beliefs had been shattered by the verdict given. He also stated that the whole process was filled with lies told by both women. Things took a different turn in 2013 as Shirley and Lynette Banfield's convictions were overturned by the Court of Appeal. It was argued that women were convicted of the joint enterprise murder of Don, but there was no evidence to prove that they were both involved in the murder. Regardless, the lawyer did not deny the fact that it was likely that either of them could have been involved in the murder. Although the conviction of the women for fraud still stood as they had earlier admitted, they were no longer charged with Don's murder, and with that the murder of Don Banfield remains unsolved. Thank you for listening to the story of Donald Banfield. What do you think? Do you think that the prosecutors could have done a better job to ensure that the conviction stood? Let us know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to stay in touch with our latest videos.